story. I grew up in small town Indiana on the Ohio River, no diversity whatsoever. Moved to Queens, New York to try to be a hotshot actor in 1999, one of the most diverse communities in the entire world. Saw 9/11 happen in person, and that sent me back to church, the Riverside Church on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And it was not only the spirituality I received from that church, but a ministry of the church to go and visit on a weekly basis immigrants detained at the Elizabeth Detention Center in New Jersey that really transformed my life. Started going every week for about 8 years, became the coordinator of the program, saw the worst of humanity, and also saw the best of the human spirit to survive and to move forward. And the people that I visited on a weekly basis inside ended up becoming some of the best teachers I've ever had. And so I always say auditioning for Mamma Mia just didn't end up being all that important anymore. I went back to school and studied the intersect of faith and migration. And while I worked for groups like the National Council of Churches, the Interfaith Youth Corps, larger think tanks on a national and international level, I really was much more interested in working with a local nonprofit in a city and a state that was going through some very rapid demographic shifts. And that is when I found FaithAction International House. Can you see my, let's see, screen here now? FaithAction International House. And essentially, we've been around for 20 years and we do three things. We serve about 3,000 new immigrants from over 60 countries each year, the vast majority of whom have limited or no status, live near below the poverty line, live in tremendous fear of current immigration policies, and yet also, as many people have noted, have tremendous gifts to offer our community as well. So do a lot of daily direct help with food, housing, healthcare, legal services, emergency help with detention, and are especially well known for our community ID card program, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But just as important to us is educating our larger community about immigration and diversity issues, so they're not believing everything they hear on the news or on evening debates, but are learning from reliable facts as much as possible, and never forgetting the human story behind migration. So we do about 75 trainings a year with law enforcement, health and social service agencies, schools, faith communities, and many others. Third thing we do is bring those two groups together. The immigrants we serve and advocate alongside the larger community we're educating. So as much as possible, they come together and eat together, laugh together, sing together, cry together, dance, kick a soccer ball, do what human beings were meant to do so that strangers in our community become neighbors. And when we say strangers, we don't mean immigrants as strangers. It means we're all strangers to one another on this webinar until we begin to share a little bit more of our stories and go a little bit deeper, which is why I shared a little bit of my own. A part of the faith part of FaithAction is not that we promote any particular faith or religion, rather that we recognize and believe in the shared values of many faiths and moral traditions, especially around three key areas: the dignity of all human beings, concepts of welcoming the stranger, and loving our neighbor as ourselves, which is something you can find in pretty much any faith and moral tradition throughout human history. Also talk about faith and the idea of having faith in one another as human beings beyond lines of culture, race, faith, and nationality, and even political affiliation. Congregations have been an absolute hallmark of who it is that we connect with. They are key as our volunteers, as our donors, as our movers and shakers and bridge builders in our community. And we work with diverse congregations, from Baha'i community to Muslim community to diverse Christian communities to the Jewish community. And we came up with a model many years ago that I hope you all find is a very practical model for how you can engage intersectionally diverse congregations to engage in your work at the local level. And we call this the stranger to neighbor congregations model. And it's really especially for diverse congregations, no matter where they sit on the religious spectrum or the theological spectrum, conservative, liberal, however you want to frame that, that agree to utilize those shared religious values, again, those three that I mentioned earlier that you can see there, and the following 4 steps to broaden their understanding of who their neighbor is, which is a central kind of question you'll find in virtually every religious tradition. Who is my neighbor? And for them to put their faith into action in their community. And essentially, it's a heart and mind journey that we take congregations and congregants on. And the first step is education. Much of what we're doing today, and that Denzel did beautifully earlier, learning from non-biased resources that deepen perspectives, challenge stereotypes about those who may be different from them in culture, nationality, and religion, so that they can grow in their understanding of and respect for our newest neighbors. Now, a lot of people say that's all we need is education. That'll solve it. But we disagree. We think education is that first seed that you plant, and the mind starts to open a little bit, the door starts to crack a little bit, but that's why we followed up as quickly as possible with personal relationships, exchange between newcomers and existing citizens. So we try to create what we call these stranger to neighbor opportunities so that they can come together, build lasting personal relationships, not just the one-off kind of kumbaya interfaith gathering, but consistent meals, dance events, many other things where they can be human beings together, build greater empathy and trust, and identify shared values as well as concerns. You want to get to that level of dialogue. What are your shared concerns in the community, despite your differences? And if they have some shared concerns, then that means step 3, they can take action on those shared concerns. So having them assess what's been learned and experienced in the first 2 steps, then put their faith into action in a way that is cooperative, empowering, and mutually beneficial to all, that uses the gifts of both existing citizens and newcomer congregations, demonstrating that we're better together. And then finally, share that story. If your congregation or even you individually has taken this heart and mind stranger to neighbor journey, share those stories that prove that we're a safer, healthier, more inclusive and united community when strangers become neighbors. And we believe the more that we tell that story of existing citizens and newcomers building friendships, the more that versus the dominant narrative of conflict, that's how you're ultimately going to change the entire culture. And I'll basically end by giving you an example of what the stranger to neighbor model looks like in action. I mentioned our ID card program, which has now been around for 6 years and is in now over 25 locations across North Carolina and the nation, from Hood River, Oregon to Charlottesville, Virginia, to West Palm Beach, Florida, to Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. Very different cities in context and in culture, and yet this model has worked in all of them. Essentially, we saw a lot of our daily newcomer clients, many of them were reporting crimes, and essentially we knew that at some point we needed to involve law enforcement, and they would say to us, no way, they're like sharks out to get us, and that's, you know, understandable for why they might feel that way. And so we knew we had some bridge building work to do. So we both educated the immigrant community on local law enforcement, differences between highway patrol, local police, sheriff, ICE, and sometimes those are fuzzy lines. And then law enforcement, we did all-day trainings on how to build greater understanding, trust, and cooperation with their newest neighbors. We then brought them together. Where did we bring them together? In houses of worship, where everybody felt humanized, where people felt safe. It was an ICE-sensitive location to be in dialogue and to eat together and to share stories together. And we had an officer share his story about how his parents crossed a border and how he and his parents were undocumented for a while. And, you know, he knows they're struggling. You saw this tear start to flow. And essentially they got to a place where they were starting to dance together, even though, you know, tension came up. They tripped on one another's feet a little bit, but they eventually got to the place where they said, we're building some trust here, but how can we build trust if you don't believe who we say we are when you stop us? And police were saying, well, look, we don't know your IDs they're from your home country. We always have to have that. And then the immigrant community said, why don't you give us driver's license? And law enforcement said, that's not up to us. That's a state or a federal issue. And then we had a shared concern in the community around identification. That's when we raised our hand and said, what if we bring together faith leaders, law enforcement, health centers, schools, businesses, together with our newcomer community at the same table, and create an ID card program that could work for everybody. And to make sure that when people come to get those ID cards, we continue to do it at houses of worships, from temples to mosques to churches, rotated, and make sure we keep that dialogue up between law enforcement, health centers, schools, businesses, and newcomers that are participating in this ID program. And that it's not just for immigrants. It is for members of the LGBTQ community, elderly, homeless populations, and anybody that supports a diverse and inclusive community. 6 years later, 25,000 ID cards, over 95% have reported that it increases access, dignity, and a sense of belonging in their community, and sometimes life-saving ways, while building truly and measurably safer, healthier, more inclusive, united community for all people. So I know that was quick. I know it was a lot, but I hope it was practical, at least in our context. Thanks for this opportunity.